Hey guys, so I've been playing around with UV4 today and some of the character models that we've been working on, and along the way I thought it'd be interesting to kind of do a base ground roots type of lecture. I guess I don't do video tutorials. I'm not the type. I'm not the person to go to show you how to push a button or what have you. I would rather focus on the big picture of how things interact and try to give some form of explanation of how the things interact to produce the kind of results you want. Now, one of the things that has been kind of brought up from time to time is the idea of image-based lighting. In other words, using an image to produce a lighting solution that couples with whatever lighting elements that you add and becomes part of the total solution. Unfortunately, Unreal 4 does not support image-based lighting, which would be nice as they compare to more advanced systems, rendering systems. In my case, I use 3ds Max, so 3ds Max comes with two of the basic lighting elements as to a skylight as well as a directional light, but they have added a third, which is a sunlight system. Now, the sunlight system is just a combination of a directional light and a skylight, which of course Unreal 4 has, but they added the two together into a single package referred to as a skylight. Now, there are solutions that are available through the marketplace that actually applies that kind of connectivity in theory, but it's still not a volumetric as into an image adding its luminosity, especially through emissive solutions, to the total solution. So, but it kind of works around the problem by applying it to other elements in a mutually coupling type of effect. So to kind of prove that out, I have two lighting systems here. Okay, first of all, this is just you go over to new level and you select this level here and boom, up it comes. And this is what we're working with to kind of illustrate the point. So if I select this little gizmo here, the skylight, and I delete that out of the scene, nothing really happens. But if I select the skylight and I hit this button here, the actor source is referenced by another actor object. Do you really want to delete it? Yes. Maybe it'll break the references, blah blah blah, which is the sky sphere. So if we select the sky sphere, which is way up here, there it is, it's been selected, and we look at our details panels, you can see that the directional light actor that has been applied to they need to actually apply a direction to the lighting solution is part of the blueprint that is which is the sky sphere as an ability to actually correct for sunlight direction. So if we wanted to, we have our sunlight brightness. If we yard that up, where is our sun? There's our sunlight. If we yard that up or down, we can increase the intensity of the sunlight. We don't want to go to negative, otherwise we just get the shadow effect. So if we select that to 0, boom, our sun's gone. But if we increase it, of course, to bring our light back, our sun back into the scene, and of course we have bloom and all sorts of nice effects going on. We have a atmospheric fog. We don't want that. What we want is visual effects. We want where are you? Atmospheric. Do we want atmospheric? Yeah, that's a good question. Sun multiplier, fog multiplier. Let's just get rid of that. I think we want exponential height fog. So if we bring that in, we can then turn on up the density. You can see that the density is changing, and we can add it as a volumetric fog. There we go, boom. So as a volumetric fog, $100, 10, 5, 1.8. I think it's got a bit of a glitch into it that you have to ramp up the density a bit to get to where you want it to go. Okay, so now we have kind of a foggy scene. We can select our sky sphere again and up our sun density, I guess. And this is where we start getting those interesting ray tracing type of lighting shafts. So this is actually a true volumetric in that it applies its tendencies to the end solution rather than just using an atmospheric fog, which is it's not the same. I won't go into explanations because it's rather in depth. So if we eliminate this light, now you can see that we still have a lighting solution that's affecting the scene. If we hit play, because it was a movable light, of course, the light addition to the scene has been removed. If we hit build, basically our little platform here, if we let it run, come on, there you go, thank you. You can see that our platform has turned all black, but our sky is still illuminated. This is because it uses an emissive, but as we can see, it does not apply any kind of lighting solution to our scene. So if we go to our base, our sphere, and we select our sky mesh, this is our material that's been applied to it, which is a instant copy of this parent, which you can see it has an emissive color that's been added to it. So this emissiveness is not a lighting solution as an image-based lighting material type of thing. So a lot of blueprints get around this by coupling the light, whatever light that you want to use, to the solution. So if we add, for example, a directional light to our scene, and we select our sky sphere, we can go over to directional light actor, select this, and select that light, and pop in. It goes into our lighting solution as part of our sky dome. Now, if there's some advanced lighting or scene blueprints that takes this idea of it further than this. This is very limited as into applying lighting to the scene. So if we go ahead and we're going to add at least some kind of object to our efforts. So we'll go over to our character blueprints and add that in. Just drag and drop. And there we go. And we hit build. Let it go through. And let's see what happens. Ta-da! Okay, so we now have a lighting solution that's applying a shadow in a direction that we would expect, but overall unbalanced. Like this type of shadowing here is not what we would expect a character in this type of environment to be illuminated. If we just sort of go outside and we turn our back to the sun, the person that's in front of us can very well see what we look like, and it doesn't have this shadowy depth to it. So the solution to this problem is to increase the indirect lighting. So what we're doing is we're firing lighting down, and it's hitting the ground, and it's bouncing off on all sorts of different directions. But our indirect intensity is not high enough to actually balance out the shadowing effect that is being created based on the intensity of the indirect lighting. So we got the indirect lighting intensity here, and normally if you select it and ramp it up, we can then go ahead and do a build. Once we complete the build, it should also add a little bit more detail to our body shadow down here. So we'll just let that play or render out. And we can now see that the indirect lighting is behaving in an expected manner, just using the indirect lighting. So this gives us an option. Do we want to add a skylight, which is the normal tendency, or do we just want to make use of an indirect lighting solution, which is a artistic prerogative more than it is a requirement. It depends on how it looks. So if I'm looking at this, that's actually for doing very, very little work is actually a very nice type of result. We're looking at the skin texturing and the clothing texture. If we get up close to it, we can see just how nicely the overall balance is. It looks rather normalish, shall we say, as to expectations. Now let's try decreasing the number of bounces down to 2, do another build, and see what happens. It's kind of strange that we're using a skeletal model and we actually have to do a rebuild. But that has more to do with changing the indirect lighting intensity to begin with. So we'll let that build and take a look at the result once again. Lighting build, come on. Compress our textures here. Come on, there we go. So you can see that now the indirect lighting is not as intense. Now, if we go ahead, what we can do is get really silly, and we can really ramp that up just to see what happens, and we'll hit a build. Because our indirect lighting is above and beyond what I would consider the need for a maximum setting. Now, keeping in mind once again, of course, that light maps and everything is a cheap lighting type of solution. So what we have, ta-da, is a much more intense type of solution, which, well, if you're playing some of the like Fortnite or whatever, this would be the atypical type of effect that you might want to be going for as to player visibility. Like, if we want the character to look much natural, of course, we want to decrease the amount of indirect lighting. Where in a game like Fortnite, we would naturally want to ramp up the indirect lighting so that the players can see one another, which, as we know in Urban Terror, is almost a demand by most of the players. They would want to rather see something like this as being unnatural, rather than going with much more graphic, intense type of result that would be more natural, but of course decrease the amount of visibility of a player clear across the map. So if we go way back here, we still have a fair amount of intensity that we can actually see that this player here is on the red team, or in our case, the Red Dragons. So that there does illustrate that, well, we don't need a skylight for all intents purposes, but if we want to, we can add in a skylight and see what we can do with that. Now, here we kind of run into an incompatibility problem. So, for example, if we look down here, skylight does cast some form of shadow effect, where the indirect lighting as well casts a shadow effect. So we have two elements in here. This one here is more of an entire environment type of lighting solution that should be used as a means of establishing a base lighting where a corner of your map is not like pitch black where you can't see nothing, and it doesn't balance out with the rest of the map, where the indirect lighting, of course, is what we want to make use of a little bit more extensively as far as natural shadow casting and what have you. So you might want to option and see as to cause and effect by turning off cast shadows. So if we turn off cast shadows, and we can certainly, if we want, turn the indirect lighting down to 0. This would then remove this addition down to being a little bit more, adding lighting intensity to the volume of space, rather than applying a shadow cast effect that may or may not be contradictory to the direct lighting. So it creates a much more balanced type of effect. We can also have, since this is set to 0, our overall lighting is controlled by the lighting intensity. So if we go for 1, we do a build, let's see what happens. As I mentioned, of course, in 3ds Max, you have access to a skylight system which balances out everything as far as things that you can add. So we can see that our intensity, even when we set our directional down to 1, is rather aggressive, and we lose our shadowing effect, of course, as to our skylight. So we take our skylight, we turn on cast shadow, and we select which then take our direct lighting, and we'll turn off cast shadow, and let's see what happens when we do it this way. There we go. So still weird, right? We're looking at the ground, we're looking at the light, and it's still got a weirdness to it as far as the character itself being illuminated. So what happens if we actually take the indirect lighting, and let's set that to 0, and we're going to hit building in and see what the results are. Okay, still not bad. Still bad. Indirect lighting, volume, scatter, intensity. Okay, lighting effect, intensity is set to 1. Let's set that to 0. Boom. Okay, there we go. There we go. Let's do a build now. Okay, still weird. Okay, okay, what about you? Indirect lighting. I think we got an intensity level still. Yeah, intensity level. There we go. Okay, that's the problem. Now everything is as to expectations, as to expected results. But you can kind of get an idea as to how things at this stage are actually competing with one another. They're not mutually coupling as to adding or compounding a proper lighting. So what you need to do, obviously, is to have some form of binding between these different elements, and I won't go into that right now. There are tutorials that, like I say, I don't do tutorials. I do overviews. So as you can see, if we select our sky dome, our sky sphere, and we delete that, boom, everything is just pitch black. The reason behind that is, of course, it's self-illuminated. It has its own lighting source, but its lighting source does not add to the overall lighting solution as to various elements within the scene. It only applies to the object that has been assigned to. So we have a material that has a dynamic emissive material that's been applied to it, so it limits it to that material. Now this may have changed. It's been a while since I've updated my info as to ongoing changes in the engine, but I'm using the latest version here, so this is in forward rendering, unfortunately, so we have some different factors that we always have to deal with, but this of course is a pretty good illustration of how these two elements, well, at the best of times, they don't really interact in the same solution as a sunlight system would. So if you're coming from a 3D environment using Max and Maya and what have you, you solve the problem by just throwing in a sunlight, and boom, you're ready to go with at least the very basic settings, and in whatever you change affects both the skylight system as well as the directional light as to what settings appropriately work together in mutual combination. So like I kind of pointed out, for our direct light, we want to have cast shadows, where with the skylight, we might not want to have cast shadows, which is once again back to being involved as to artistic prerogative. It's you can't, it's kind of like music. You can't really explain the construction of all the different elements that kind of work together. So we'll go ahead, hit the build button again, and of course we have everything set to 0. But let's take a look at what happens when we do apply a HDR or type of lighting system solution to, in this case, the skylight, which as for practical use, we need to put things into context. So for practical use, we want to be able to create a lighting solution that creates a balance in the overall lighting. So you're not running into areas where you have really deep, heavy shadows and into other areas where they're really kind of skimpy and that kind of thing, and everything kind of, well, you know what I mean. It doesn't really blend well. So if we say, for example, we're going to use HDR here, and we're going to use this cloudy sky, because it is, some of these times you're dealing with cloudy skies, and we're going to ramp up the intensity, and you can see right away that our intensity level is starting to creep up. So this is now being based solely on what would be considered image-based lighting. So we have to apply our lighting image to whatever solution that provides that level. Now, I also have another video out there somewhere that demonstrates how you can use a post-process volume to increase the amount of ambient light as to compared to direct light. So what we can do is, of course, is increase or decrease the amount of shadowing effect in a given area without blowing out the lighting elements, lighting addition. So let's go ahead and do a build again and just see what happens. This is what I kind of do all the time. I just basically set up a rough scene, throw some stuff into it, then play around with the values, and then of course when I'm done, I just kill the program and I'm out of it. And then there's no need to save this kind of thing. Okay, so we can see that even with shadowing turned on, or cast shadow is not turned on. Let's see what happens if we turn on cast shadow and do another build. Sometimes it does cast a shadow. Sometimes it doesn't cast a shadow. It's a matter of configuration. Sometimes some features that are not properly implemented, they're there for exploration purposes. But we can see that, hey, what's going on here? We kind of lost our lighting, didn't we? Okay, what if we ramp up our solution? Oh, okay. Our player model is actually increasing and decreasing into shadow. That is kind of interesting, huh? How much control we got over that. What happens if we turn off cast shadow? Okay, what if we increase and decrease? Okay, so because it's a skeletal model, it actually couples to our skylight. So how can we use this? If we turn off cast shadow and we increase the amount of intensity, we have control of how our player models look within the environment as reference to the volume of space around it. That's actually kind of interesting. Okay, so what happens if we increase the intensity of our intensity of our indirect lighting, or our directional lighting, I should say. Let's give that 1, 2. Let's leave it at 2, and do a build and see what happens. There, boom. Not bad. We're getting into something. We got kind of a Fortnite type of lighting setup going on here. That's pretty cool. So something like this would be a normal type of urban terror expectation of player visibility, rather than being natural in its effect. So what happens if we, playing again, what happens if we increase the indirect lighting intensity? Now usually this will only allow you to max out at 6. Now 6 is a lot, but sometimes, once again, artistic prerogative. Nothing says you can't go to 20. Now let's see what happens when we hit the build light button. I would expect things to be a little bit more intensified as far as our player model goes. So you can see we still have a shadow, but we have decreased the overall shadowing effect on the player, and the player itself actually actually luminesce without the need for an emissive type of material be applied to it. So, so if this is the kind of thing you're looking for as far as a result output. Now there is another option where you can apply. I'm not going to go into it. The video's out there that just uses a simple HDR image to either increase or decrease the amount of ambient fill. So as far as building a complex indirect lighting solution, as you would expect in an application like Maya, 3ds Max, or probably even Blender, it's how two components interact with one another, as well as being able to use a material as a source of projecting lighting that such rendering solutions offers over above the limitations of what's available in Unreal 4. And you more or less do have, if you have a particular type of lighting result that you're looking for, you got to kind of work for it. It's not a free lunch, but as you can see quite clearly, there are very drastic changes of how these lighting elements interact with the character solutions in the environment here. So if we turn off cast shadowing, boom, entire world, cast shadow, boom, we're casting a shadow from this lighting solution on the ground. Even though it doesn't project a shadow effect, what it does is it applies a shadow map or matting to the entire environment in an attempt and means to be able to decrease the amount of lighting impact to the environment as compared to using an indirect lighting to actually produce the shadow of the character. So let's turn that off again, cast shadow. No, that's the, you can see that's because I got this selected, cast shadow. Select this guy here, turn off and on, cast shadow. If we turn it off, you can see that it adds a increased level to the entire environment, which we can control by decreasing the amount of obvious intensity output. And you can see that the player's shadow is starting to come in down at the bottom. It's getting more intense until we get down to, say, 0, which is the same thing as turning off the cast shadow, or turning on and off the cast shadow effect, I guess. And then you can play with things like this threshold, cube map resolution, stuff like that, source angle. You can see that we can change the angle of how the lighting is affecting the character. We can change the lighting to movable, stationary, or static. So we got those as options too as well. Drastic change. And as you can see at static, the intensity level of our cube map no longer applies. We got to go to stationary for that to work. It also has to be in stationary if you're using anything that's animated that you want to cast a shadow to as well. Excuse me, as well. Okay, so I think that was that was probably hopefully a pretty interesting demonstration as to cause and effect of the two different lighting. And as I sort of hinted at and suggested many times, that the two can interact in a negative way as well as it can in a positive way. So you should actually, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, spend some time just playing with the new level. Everything that you need is actually included as far as a base lighting solution goes. It's not great because we want to, as you see the original character that we had to set up, it doesn't have a proper lighting balance. It's not ideal. Gotta work with it, but it's a lot more natural as I would expect on a sunny day like this, rather than looking hot. What I like to call going from a cold pool to a hot shower. So you're at the back here, and it looks reasonably right. It looks reasonably okay. You go to the back here, and it turns to mush. Now there is also another thing that drastically affects the type of overall solution you get as to lighting principles is, of course, is materials. Like, we could spend forever talking about material behavior. Now, this is something that I actually learned in 3ds Max, and since Unreal 4 does use a PBR or real world type material solutions, in other words, with the proper types of materials and settings, what have you, it behaves in the way that you would expect a particular object would. So, for example, a mirror surface or shiny, like a car painted surface, has a very high reflective surface to it, where, you know, this down here has is just a very basic material with very little material information. Let's see what it does have. Yeah, it has some PBR type of parameters to it. We have a base color, a roughness, and a normal map, which is basically the 3 that you need. And we can play around with specularity and ambient occlusion to get this to look a little bit more better or perfect. But its reflectivity quality is very low, so the light doesn't bounce as readily off of it as you would expect it to. So if we actually had this in a room and this was applied to it, and we added a simple point light, we would expect a very low number of bounces off the different walls, where if we apply, say, a paint material that's used for a car, which has a high reflectivity value to it, then a simple light like this would more or less bounce around the room like crazy. So let's go to G, just to kind of play around with the idea a little bit more. Do I still have the light? Did I actually put a light into it? Looks like it. Let's get rid of it and just put another one in. Oh, no, I had actually something else selected. Where's my light? Did I put one in? Oh, well, let's go ahead and put a point light in. Oh, not that one. That's a rectangle point. Okay, there we go. But just to kind of play around with this idea a little bit more, just to kind of illustrate lighting behavior. Go. Get a map scene. There's some on the launcher and the marketplace where you got a couple of rooms and what have you. A point light is obviously better suited for being used inside a room as opposed to being outside. There is ways to being able to use the point light source to introduce an additive to your environment for the purpose of, say, what I like to call painting with lights, where you may want to add a splash of light on a certain area space to add a kind of stylish definition to its quality, you know. And of course, white equals bad, so we probably want to add some coloration to it just to kind of offset it. You know, if we want to go outdoors, if it's nighttime, a little bit of blue. If we're talking about daylight, maybe a little bit more orangey, possibly yellowish. You know, it really depends on the time of day you want to apply it to it. And we'll go okay. So now our light doesn't burn our eyeballs out with a pure 100% white light. In nature, there is no such thing as 100% white of anything. You know, it's going to be kind of weirdish. Okay, so anyways, to point out some things that usually some people have difficulty with as to the ideals is, first of all, by default, inverse lighting is turned on, or inverse square fall off is turned on, which is a natural lighting behavior that you would expect. Now in 3ds Max, inverse square is turned off because of the rendering hit that is applied to using an inverse fall off. Now, that's just because of the photometric nature of the light. It adds to rendering time, and that rendering time could be, you know, substantial. Yeah, something that without inverse lighting would take seconds to render out could take minutes, hours to accomplish the same task. The same thing with ray trace shadowing effect. So that kind of stuff really adds a performance hit as far as rendering goes. Let's get rid of you. Where did you come from? I have no idea. The other thing is the fall off limits itself. Now I see a lot of times people will throw in a light element, and then they'll decrease the amount of space that lighting needs to fall off. This here, which can be changed here. Attenuation radius. They'll say, okay, well, I want the light to affect this amount of area. The thing is, the fall off doesn't really determine how much it bleeds intensity off. It just determines where to begin and where to end its calculations within a set volume of space. So we want to be able to cover as much as we can see as far as the volume goes. So we want since we're on a platform here, it should your attenuation radius should be overlapping or outside of the visible area that you're in. As all it does is says, hey, Mr. Light, stop any calculations at this point. Where if we didn't have this limitation, this radius, it would just simply go on for infinity. As far as, well, you're probably used to it by now, of Unreal 4 complaining that you do not have a light mass volume, so it's going to take longer to actually render out any light maps for you because I have no way of determining of where I should end my calculations. So that's what this does. It just simply tells you, don't go past this as far as your calculations goes. So if you say, for example, well, I want, obviously, I got some walls here and I want my fall off behavior to end at the walls. That's really not best practice. So you want to actually increase the amount of volume of that. The light intensity itself only determines how much intensity the light is going to put off as far as direct lighting goes. So as applied, this is where it's going to end. Let's have a little bit more playtime here, right? This is the kind of thing that I like to do consistently. So we got a nice splash going. We'll do a build. I'm going to have a smoke, guys. I know you can't smoke in class, but that's not to say I have any class at all. So, and of course I like how the hazy, lazy lighting solutions kind of does its thing there. So, ta-da! Okay, so we're pretty close to being accurate as far as a proxy of how the light should look. But of course our sky dome behavior, of course, is acting as a background, so we get rid of that, and ta-da, look what happened. We got a nice pitch black background with no emissiveness to it, and that looks much better. So, okay, so we got that kind of idea sold. We can see how much light, based on the overall intensity that we applied to it. So what happens, but we're still not getting the kind of, like if we had walls, this would just end where it's ending. It wouldn't extend deeper. So to extend deeper, we need to increase the lighting intensity of our indirect lighting, and just for giggles, we are going to increase our light mass number of bounces. So we go down here looking for, they like to change the names and locations of stuff. What we're looking for, I think we're looking for, is light mass. Yeah, there you are. And we want to change the number of indirect lighting bounces, and set to 3. We'll set that to 100. Number of skylighting bounces. We don't have any skylights, so we'll go ahead and make that 100. Once again, this is something that you should be playing with. See, do a build, keep the simple scene, and for example, we go, well, I wonder what would happen if I increase the amount of light intensity, or what about environment intensity? What about diffuse boost? What does that do? So, sit around and just play around with the lighting and seeing how its behavior. Just use what I'm saying here as a basis of understanding of how to set up the lighting in the first place, so you can play with it, and of course cover some of the basics like the indirect lighting as to how it behaves in relationship to other lightings in the area. So if we had an indirect lighting, and we have shadowing turned on and so forth, how does these two compound? Now there is a theory in lighting, lighting, as in science, as in let's science the shit out of this, as to how lighting should interact is in a compound or mutual coupling effect. So if we have a light that's +1 and we have another light that's +1, and we combine those two, then where they intersect, it should be +2. +1 + 1 = 2. So it's a mutual coupling type of effect. And of course, we should see a differential in how the shadowing affects as an object crosses that path. Okay. So actually, let's see if we can create an interesting environment. Let's put a bit of a block in the back here and do some more playing. Okay, so we'll select our light here. We're going to actually decrease the amount of radius so we can just kind of see how this kind of effect. We're going to decrease the amount of intensity of the light. Intensity, remember, is how much energy is putting into the direct lighting. And we're going to change our attenuation base here and bring that down so it does not, it's inside the wall there, and we'll do a build and see what happens. Remember, we have our indirect lighting intensity set to 6. So we have a lot more energy that's being being pushed out. So you can see that our background there is actually kind of disappeared, right? We got absolutely, do have, remember, this is where the fall off begins. This is where our light is going to start to taper off. So when it hits the wall back here, which I think I just moved, Control V, and there we go. And of course we have eye adaptation turned on. I'm not going to bother turning it off. I don't want to mess around. But you can see once again our back is shadowed with some really nice rim lighting. You know, it's our actor kind of stands out. So playing around again, what happens if we actually move that up? And we'll keep our intensity level where it is, but we'll set the intensity level to 1, and we will increase our radius amount so it catches the back wall. We need to rebuild, you see. Let's see what happens. Okay, there we go. Pretty accurate. Oops, no, we're still waiting for it to build. Yep, there we go. Almost identical to what we had before with a lower light level intensity. So, by increasing the bounce, though, but as you can see, the backlighting of the character is not as intense as it was the way we had it set up before. So let's play some more and see what happens. Okay, we're going to use temperature and just get a kind of an idea. You can see how we can increase or decrease the amount of heat that's in the actual lighting. And of course we have to do a build. Let's see how close this actually represents the character. Okay, you got a little bit of reflection capture here too as well. That's kind of important too, as to how light is interacting with the materials as to as to its material behavior. So if you have, say, some gold type of metal that's been introduced, if we move our solution down and we pull it back out and we go to our detail panel, and ooh, look at that, we also have a cube map that we can add to it. Look for this kind of stuff because you can add this can add to the type of amount of intensity. So we're capturing scenes and we want to add our own reflectivity to it, and we'll do a build overall again. We can just rebuild the recapture, but we might as well just rebuild all of the lighting when we're at it. Map errors found. Floor is the same location. Okay, so that means I have, boom, you see, floor is in the same location as floor 3, etc., etc. So we would get obviously some Z buffer fighting going on there. but now it's gone, and we have some really weird, introduce some weird lighting in. We're going to grab our sphere here, and we're going to increase our brightness. You can see that our metal, okay, we need some more work done on the belt here to actually give it a much more metallic type of behavior. So this is why you need this. Once again though, we have a volume of area as to how far out this would affect. Just keep in mind that once again it just represents a calculation volume limit as into how far out do we have as far as limitations goes. Now we'll do one more push a button and see what happens. Let's really boost artistic prerogative. Let's see what happens if we boost the indirect intensity. While using temperature, okay, source radius and what have you is, well, we won't get into that. Play with it. Basically what it allows you to do is to create, like, say for example, a fluorescent tubing. Now, look what happened to our player model. Remember that when we first looked at it, we had quite a very thick shadowing density in this area. And if we look at the back, we have from just one light source, one single light source, we have light permutation in this volume of space, which looks a lot more natural than it would be if we used a half a dozen different lights that interact in an incorrect manner in this area. So I think that is enough to make you dangerous, anyways, and to illustrate the point that playing with stuff is not going to, you're not going to cause any harm. You know. We've discussed the idea that the actual radius is just a means to be able to limit the amount of volume that the calculation is actually going to be involved in, rather similar to a light mass importance volume. So it speeds up the amount of calculation time that's required for this volume of space. I'd also like to throw in a little bit of a tip here. Okay, let's move that a little bit closer so we can bring that in. If we look at this as an element, the amount of light map resolution that's been applied to this space is 128. So that's not bad, but my normal workflow when I'm playing around with this is to go crazy. I want to see how things react at the deep end as to what would be considered rather aggressive settings. So it's not uncommon to go 1024 for light mass resolution of an object this big, and this one would be 1024, and then of course we'll do a build just to see how on an exaggerated light map the lighting behavior is going to create any kind of a result that might be better than what we're dealing with here. Okay, so let that build and see if there's any subtle difference. I wouldn't expect any difference with this type of geometry and texture maps and what have you. But you can see now that it's going to take a fair amount more time to actually render it out. So that's why a lot of your core type of ready-made assets are rather lacking in light map resolution in the first place, because then it allows you to start throwing stuff into the environment and seeing how it actually quickly do a light build that doesn't take a long time to actually accomplish. So if we were to actually build an environment and use light maps that were suitable for the purpose of the surface that is being applied to, you can go from a comfortable editing timeline, say taking 20 minutes to half an hour for a fairly large environment, to the entire night just to see what's going on. So as a supplied asset, meaning that if I make an object, the preference would be to put a low resolution light map onto your object, for the purpose of making sure that the rendering of a light map for that object is quick and fast, and the person's not actually waiting around because you decide you want to go with an over-exaggerated light map. So it's just more of a workflow type of idea. So over the course of time developing the environment, I'll decrease the amount of resolution that is actually required as to being a little bit more ideal. 128, not really ideal. There is a problem that you can run into. Let's say, for example, we take this wall here connects to this here, and we were to take this here and set it back to its native resolution. If this was, say, interconnected as part of the floor, say we had a floor with a floor, and we had a 16 by connected to another floor element that had a 1024 by, then you're going to notice a difference in the light map blending across the seam. So this would be 64. This is 1024. If we were using these as connecting objects, say like this type of idea. I don't want to go too deep. I don't want to get in too deep. I want to finish this off. I think we've gone long enough. Okay, so we'll make that 1024. We'll do one more build here. I obviously don't have it. I got a little bit of overlapping, so we'll probably get some Z buffer fighting across this way. But let's see if I can quickly see if there's going to be any kind of exaggerated type of artifact across our seam, even though we're overlapping, and it probably will, etc., etc. It shouldn't. Normally it doesn't, but we got to see what happens. Taking even longer to render out, of course. We're just doing a little bit of playing. Come on. Now, can we see? No, we do have Z buffer going. I don't see any artifacts. Probably because we don't have any materials applied to it, etc., etc. So I think that's enough tips and tricks to make you dangerous. And but the point of being illustrated is how a single point light source can accomplish a lot without having to put 1,000. Okay, one more thing. We'll go Steve Jobs on you. We'll go back to our inverse square because this is handy. We're going to turn off inverse square. Boom! Immediately we have zero fall off, really, because it's a non-inverse effect, and it's going to go and go and go as far as the volume of space before it starts to fall off. You can see it starts to fall off here at the edge of our environment. Now we're going to get rid of this one in the back here because it just adds to the rendering time, and we're going to take our light here, source here. We're casting a shadow. And we're going to change the intensity. It's still set to 1. That's pretty good, eh? And we are going to leave our indirect lighting where it is, but we're going to turn off cast shadow. And we're going to go ahead and build. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, for one thing, it adds a tool to your toolbox where if you're dealing with a problematic area where you're not getting enough light intensity into, like, say, down a hallway. Now, the old trick in 3ds Max, before it had advanced lighting systems and renderosity and that kind of stuff, was that you could build your own renderosity effect down, say, a hallway, for example, where you could put cascading lights, which would decrease in the amount of intensity of light that's being introduced into that area, and actually create a fake type of renderosity type of effect. So if we look at the back of the player, you can see that you know, even with an indirect lighting intensity of 20, with shadowing turned off and the way we have it configured, all it does is it kicks up the lighting that's already there. In other words, it mutually couples with whatever lighting that we've actually introduced. So it becomes an interesting little tool to use if you just need a little bit more. You need to turn things up to 11, so to speak, and get a nice lighting balance. So if we actually moved our lighting, and we have, you can see cast shadow is actually turned off. The front of our character should become dark. So based on all the other lighting techniques that I kind of showed you here, using a simple, base quick start level, you can kind of start to see, hopefully, by different configurations, you can either introduce a negative result to your lighting as compared to something that would be more positive. So we might want to, for example, push, say this is a tunnel, we might want to push lighting from the front of the character, but at the same time we want to be able to have a bit of a rim light to our character. You can see that the rim lighting effect is really starting to pop out. We'll do one last build, as I said. Drum roll. There we go. Yeah, our proxy light is actually pretty accurate. We got some kind of rim lighting going on. Anywho, let's call it done. Just based on some, basically as an explanation of the things they don't tell you standpoint of, just throwing in a skylight and throwing in a directional light, there are consequences as to interaction between the two of them. Could be positive, could be negative, but the solution to the problem is having a overall understanding as to lighting behavior, as to expectations. That's what you're looking for, really, is predictability in whatever light that you put into it. And you can say, well, I'll just turn off inverse lighting and I'll kick this up and I'll increase my boom. Oh yeah, that's exactly how I expect it to behave. And of course, adding on the bonus of a workflow for light map resolutions. We're getting close to being finished. We don't like that. We want to test at 128. We then do a lighting build and look at it and say, yeah, that's good enough. We'll leave it at 128. But you start out. My philosophy is you always go more than what you need, because you can always take too much and make it less, but you can't take less and make it do more. And we'll end on that note. Bye bye.